Well, good evening, folks. It's the real Captain Kirk here. We're live from One Bethlehem Plaza here in downtown Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Weather Trends 360's headquarters. It's time for our 2023 year ahead ag outlook again for hundreds of farmers here in the U.S. that we support and again around the world. Folks say, why do you say the real Captain Kirk? And I'm going to date myself here. Some 33 years ago, met this famous general. If you're under 35, you probably don't know who he was. If you're over 35, you probably recall pretty clearly. General Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf used weather to his advantage, a strategic thinker, and forever changed how I think as a scientist. Pretty much had to dump Rutgers, physics, fluid dynamics, meteorology, all that good stuff when he said, hey, make a long-range forecast, but don't change your mind once you issue it. So again, really started having to think statistically and climate cycles to really revamp how we think as scientists. Pam, Chrissy, Rich, all meteorologists as well. Again, think like we do. They're here to support you. If you have any questions, email at support@WT360.com or the phone number listed here. So again, team of folks here, been working with farmers for many years now. We started in the retail supply side world. So these are some of our Fortune 500 clients, helping them with inventory allocation, marketing, advertising a year ahead, right? So it's really about predicting the future, if you can predict the future accurately, and then outcomes. We'll talk about that in a minute. Can have a lot of strategic value to you, not only as a farmer, but also to these big companies. We've won a lot of technology and business awards. Forbes said we're the 5th most promising company in America some years ago. We'll see about that. There's still a lot to prove. Let's start here before we get into the 2023 outlook here, just a little bit of background for the new folks with us this year. Again, so first thing you got to do is you're going to do year ahead weather. You got to start to dump physics, meteorology, and think differently. So if meteorology is basically, if this was one drop in the ocean, that'd be very simple physics. We could predict that with physics and fluid dynamic equations, as we try to do in meteorology. The problem is it's millions and millions and millions of interactions, both at the surface, aloft. It's impossible. It's chaos. So it works out about a week or two. Can't do that much beyond 2 weeks. So how do you do it? If you're going to do year ahead weather, predicting temperatures, growing degree days, rainfall, snowfall by week by day, everywhere in the world, actually it's 32 million spots at this point, you have to think statistically in climate cycles. So longer term things that evolve slowly, and statistics, a big chunk of ours is math versus physics. I always joke that God invented math, so we use math. Man invented physics, not use that so much. The big way we help our big retail supply customers, again, we not only predict the weather, but then correlate it to their sales. And so we predict 10,000 seasonal category sales and what they're going to do week by week, store by store, a year ahead. Right? So it's about predicting outcomes. One thing you know as a farmer is bugs, and you're probably pretty savvy that if it's a hot, dry summer, you probably have more of those hornets and pests and things that irritate you in the tractor or in the field. So every degree hotter in the summertime, there's about a 5% increase in bug sales. 10 degrees hotter, 50% increase in bug sales. So this is one example of 10,000 seasonal items that we've factored in over the years. And the outcomes for our big clients look a little more crazy math here, but again, predicting sales by store, by week, everywhere in the world that they would actually have a store. So a little more simple for farmers here. Again, we know you like to give me an answer, Bill, not all that detail. So we have a product called FarmCast. We'll talk about that here toward the end. But again, helping a farmer with his field, what's going to happen today, this next week, 2 weeks from now, and a year ahead to help you make some of those strategic decisions. We're going to talk year ahead weather. We better talk accuracy. We never hide behind accuracy. We always show what it is. It is what it is. And I always say statistics and math will get you there most of the time. God doesn't allow us to be perfect. So we have to be humble in that regard. We will never always be 85% accurate, but that's what we typically will claim. So these bars are our year ahead forecast on a U.S. level. So this is the easy level for us. Pretty hard for most physicists that even come close to doing this. So the bars are the year ahead forecast for the U.S. Hot, red bars are hot, blue's cold. Dotted line actual. We'd score this one at about 85% accurate on temperature through January, first part of January here, 2023. We look at precip here. Again, green bars are wet, peach bars are dry, about 85% as well. So as you can see, it does really well at capturing generally where there's wetter periods, drier periods, hotter periods, colder periods. And we believe that helps farmers make some critical decisions about their crop and pesticides and for nitrogen, all the things that you need to make decisions months in advance, just like our big retail clients. Let's take this accuracy down to the Corn Belt level. So now we're talking a few states. So we're getting into much smaller geography. Guess what? We're still 85% here for 2022 into the first week of 2023. So did well of capturing generally the warmer periods, colder periods. Precip obviously important to farmers. Corn Belt was about 77% of our weeks where we hit those wet versus dry weeks again. So did relatively well here in that level too. So let's take it all the way down to one of the biggest counties in corn producing country, Iowa, Fort Dodge area again. So about 85%. So now we're down to actually a field. And as you can see, that dotted line, if it's perfect, it's on the tip of those bars, and it was pretty close to perfect. So this was a good forecast. These forecasts are more accurate than a short range 7 to 14 day forecast. And that's proven, audited. Again, so the area you'd expect in a week 2 forecast, we're more accurate than that, even though these are a year ahead forecast. Fort Dodge Precip actually did better than the Corn Belt aggregate, 82% on predicting those dry weeks. And again, as you can see, had some dry conditions throughout much of 2022. The next thing is another audited report here. This is our short range day 1 through 14 forecast. Totally different approach than our physics-based forecast. But this blue bar is basically the error of the industry. So this is the worst performing weather company out there. We don't know who that is. This would be the industry average. And Weather Trends is this green triangle. As you can see, we're typically in the top 1, 2, or 3 of all the audited weather firms. The big guys, everyone you know, is in this audit. So not doing too bad here for Weather Trends on day 1 through 5, days 6 through 9 near the top, and days 10 through 14, again, near the top, well above industry norms for the industry. Precip here on the right, again, the blue bar is the worst, way down here. Industry average is the red dot, and we're typically, you're splitting hairs with Precip, so we're about 86% accurate. The winner was 86.9% accurate, right? So you're fractions of percents usually, or low percent differences between the best and the worst. So again, pretty good on capturing those Precip trends. So let's get into the challenges that we see here for 2023. Again, obviously you're all aware of the 3-year triple dip La Nina event. It's not only that's a La Nina, and we'll talk about what that means, but it's also a very unusual cycle in the sense that we have a negative Pacific decadal oscillation cycle. It's another long-term climate cycle we look at. A lot of scientists will look at it. It's just the North Pacific and how it trends oceanic temperatures. The other trend is the positive Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation AMO cycle. So you got the Atlantic very warm. You've got the Pacific relatively cold, and then you've got the La Nina equatorial areas very cold. What this circulation pattern shows you that in a La Nina scenario, when you have cold waters here on the equatorial Pacific, you have sinking air over America and Brazil and Argentina. That sinking air aloft means dry, and that's what we've had. So we've had about 3 years of drought in the U.S. and Brazil and Argentina, obviously continuing. What it does on the other side of the world is it creates uplift, and you have a lot of rain. That's why it can get wet in Australia and China and Malaysia. Now, the equatorial Pacific is very different when it's under El Nino or neutral phases, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. The current situation right now, again, this black dotted line is where we are relative to some other years. We looked at years 1911, 1918, 1951, 76, and 2001. Those were all years that had triple dip La Ninas. They didn't necessarily have the full PDO AMO cycle that we're in now, so that makes this year extremely unique. We're talking about an event this year that's only happened twice in 156 years. So again, we're kind of an uncharted territory here when it comes to climate and cycles. But again, we'll just talk about not only this model, but as you can see, these years all went into an El Nino event in year 4, which for us is 2023. So there's pretty much no doubt we're heading for El Nino. That is our forecast. And that would match some of these prior years that had similar scenarios. Now, this is more of a modeled approach from the NOAA folks. Again, that it shows that we're currently in the weak to moderate La Nina, and consensus is that we're heading to El Nino by early summer 2023. So pretty sure, again, if you like the NOAA model, it's not always the most accurate. Another group of folks is the IRI models. Again, it also shows that we're going to get into that weak El Nino phase, again, by summer 2023. So there's pretty much consensus in that regard from models and just history. We'll look at this here. So this is what La Nina means, right? It just says cold below normal water temperatures. We have colder than normal temperatures off of Alaska and California and the Canadian areas. And then the other thing we look for is just, are we seeing cooling waters over here in the Indian Ocean? So to have a true full-blown El Nino, we'll look at this next map will be the trends versus average, right? So blues are cold, reds are hotter than normal. You see the very warm Atlantic. If we look at these trends versus last year, we see a bigger picture of what's happening. So this is comparing ocean temperatures to last year. Now what we see here is that the La Nina event is actually warming, right? It's not as extreme as it was last year. So we have warmer water popping up here in the equatorial Pacific. And if we look over toward the Indian Ocean off of Australia, you see it's getting much colder, right? So this is a classic telltale sign that we are definitely transitioning toward a El Nino type event rather than La Nina. PDO is weakening. As you can see, the waters there are getting a little bit warmer compared to last year in the Gulf of Alaska. And also the Atlantic oscillation. The warm Atlantic is not as warm as it was a year ago. So these are telltale signs that we're in a major shift. The other thing we can do is we can look at NOAA's product of buoys. This is a cross-section of the equatorial Pacific. So you're looking at the depth under the water surface, and this is measured by buoy, showing you the temperature. So we see in these reds is way above average temperatures 150, 200 meters below the surface of the equatorial Pacific out toward Malaysia, Australia, the date line. Now watch all the colds here in the right chart of this chart, which is more toward us, California, Ecuador, the La Nina event. Right? What we see is all that really dark blue here back on November. Just within a month here, we've seen all this warm water starting to bubble to the surface here. So you're definitely seeing a collapse of the La Nina event. I know a lot of farmers will say Yahoo, because La Ninas mean drought in Americas and Brazil and Argentina. So the good news is this pattern is collapsing with 100% certainty. This is kind of what these are called Hadley cells, and basically it's just the global circulation of how when you have rising air, you have a lot of rain, thunderstorms, and you have sinking air, you have dry air, warm, dry air. So again, what this means in a neutral condition is that we'd have more wet conditions on the East Coast, and then as we get to an El Nino phase, you see that we're pretty much getting into an overall rising motion across Americas, sinking out toward the Atlantic. And this is the factor that El Ninos can typically suppress the hurricane season, right? So because the sinking air in the Atlantic just doesn't allow hurricanes to form. So we will be transitioning toward this pattern here. And what you see also is the sinking air in China and Australia and Malaysia. They will dry out. So there's definitely dry in the forecast for China. They've had a few good crop years here, definitely drying out in China. So they could have some risk. And obviously they're a big player in buying up what little corn there might be out there, corn, soybeans. So need to watch that, because definitely think that China could have a much drier year and much more favorable here in the U.S. and Brazil as we go through the season. Let's talk quickly here about where we are right now. This is as of the end of December here. So this is another NOAA product, basically showing the drought conditions. Obviously, we're still in a uncharted territory here. Most expanse of dry to drought phases, D0, D4, in 22 years. So we're getting about 74% of the country in these D0, D4 phases. Average would be closer to about 47%. A little less than half the country should be in D0, D4 normally. So we're well above that. And again, the most in 22 years, even eclipsing that 2012 year. What you see here is a little bit of the drought expanding into the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, Southeast. Obviously, we've had epic rain and snow in California. That drought is about over. It'll take a while for the official forecast to say that, but obviously after this winter, the drought in California is non-existent. And what this means is this will transition across the country. So typically, you're already seeing the wet conditions in the Rockies. That'll eventually erode the route in the plains. And we may actually see the drought more expand toward the East Coast, eastern part of the Corn Belt rather than the central and western Corn Belt. So this should be good news. We're not out of the woods yet, but the cycles are definitely suggesting some very positive trends in terms of better growing conditions for our U.S. farmers. South America, obviously very critical. They're in their full season corn phase right now. And so what we see here is map left actually is the precipitation versus average. Now this is for December through March. They have two growing seasons down there. So this is their first full growing season here. So what you see is it's still very dry in southern Brazil and for sure Argentina. So you're hearing about all the headlines about soybeans issues in Argentina. You're hearing some improving conditions in Brazil, and that they've got their crop in on time, which means they're going to get their second exportable crop, the safrinha crop, in the ground here probably in March when this first crop comes out of the ground. So the good news is the crop in Brazil got in the ground on time. That means they're getting more moisture. Crop should be doing pretty well. Get this crop out of the ground, get the next one in. Again, the general theme here for Brazil for sure, after several years of extreme drought conditions and epic yield losses a year ago, that there's some good news here. We actually see this again, December through March period. Again, this is for the crop that's just in the ground now. Wettest in 7 years, 46% wetter than last year. Still 7% below average, but that's a huge improvement. Again, this is the wettest in 7 years. So this is good news for this crop that's in the ground. Coolest in 7 years, above average. Last year was number one hot. So last year, number one hot, dry. We know what that means. Bad crop yield conditions for them. Again, they don't have necessarily the sophisticated hybrid models of corn that we have. So again, some good news here for them in this crop. And also, again, good news for that second crop, the safrinha crop going in here in our spring timeframe. So generally, the theme would be good news coming out of Brazil in the months ahead, and that can put some pressure on corn prices, certainly. And then the next phase, we'll be looking at what's going to happen here in America, Ukraine. So 2023, this is the world April through June rainfall trends versus average. Yellows are dry. Greens, light greens, tend to be above average, and dark greens way above average. You start to see, again, California and the Rockies and even to the plains, we're talking more above average type rainfall and the drier conditions there in the eastern part of the country, the deep south, Ohio Valley, getting drier. Ukraine, you see, is also, relatively, it's actually wetter for this period, 18% wetter than last year, but still below average for Ukraine. But again, wetter, so certainly some good news. Obviously, they've got a lot of other issues with the war and everything, but at least some better conditions for their farmers. Brazil, again, 57% wetter. So now this is April through June. So this is getting more for their second safrinha crop. So wettest in 9 years. That second crop's going to be a pretty bumper, big crop coming out of Brazil, April, May, June timeframe. And I think that'll be the news. Markets will hear that. And so obviously they may start to think that maybe this drought cycle is indeed over. So certainly that can put some pressure on the markets and pricing. So something to watch here for sure. China drier, so below average. So driest in several years. USA, we have about 21% wetter for the Corn Belt, above average rainfall, wettest in 4 years for this critical April, May, June planting, early growing season. Trend for temperatures here. Now, these are trends. This map is actually the trends versus last year. So yellows are much warmer than last year. Blues are cooler. We've seen the Corn Belt basically similar, maybe a little bit warmer in Iowa, a little bit cooler as you go toward the eastern Corn Belt. Again, temperature is not going to be a huge factor here. We don't believe here for really the whole growing season. If we aggregate these trends here, now this is a week by week. I'll explain this, a lot to look digest here, but this is the Corn Belt aggregate, several states, obviously, from Iowa into Ohio. So this is a weekly year-ahead forecast of temp and rain, temperature trends on top. These are trends versus last year, and we like to do that just because you remember what happened this year. And if I can show you where there's going to be differences in the year ahead, then maybe you can make some strategic decisions on what you might shift. So what you see here, so obviously we're in a very much warmer January than a year ago, near record hot here lately. February, probably also warmer than a year ago, those bars. March gets risky. March, we do believe, is going to be cold and snowy from central U.S., Midwest into the east. April could be warmer and wetter. May looks to be a little dicey, a little bit colder in parts of the Corn Belt for sure. We'd be a little bit concerned, again, a little bit. Late last freeze risk would be that 7 through 13 May period. I think you're home free at that point. If you plant in mid-April, I really don't think you're going to have any issues at this point with that risk. So it's a pretty low risk because we do have a warm April. June, again, mixed bag, up and down. We don't see a lot of pressure here for pollination in terms of extreme heat. That first week in July, late June, July, maybe a little bit warmer than last year. But again, we did really well this year and don't perceive any major issues with that pollination area. And then generally cooler through the summer. So cool and wetter definitely is a plus. So the bars are in the top are just the trends versus last year. Blue's colder, red's hotter. That red line is the Corn Belt aggregate average max weekly temp. And again, we don't see extreme heat. We're not looking for 100-degree type scenarios day after day. So that it definitely looks like a pretty awesome growing condition as we get into the summer season. Min temperatures, that blue line for the Corn Belt aggregate all. Again, so we don't see any extremely high 75, 80 type nights really expected throughout the Corn Belt. As we get toward the fall harvest season, the killing freeze looks like it could be late. We don't anticipate frost issues. There's one risky week there, 17 through 23 September. I think that's a little too early for anything major, but it is a colder week. Certainly could be some very minimal frost in maybe the northern parts of the north central Corn Belt. Then a warm late September, October. We don't really have the next major freeze, most likely around the 20th through the 28th. So that would be late October for the first real killing freeze. So I think we're home free here. Chart bottom is the green bars are wetter than a year ago. Peach bar is much drier. The general theme here is, again, wettest spring in 4 years, wettest summer in 4 years, above average in both seasons. Last year was the driest spring in 10 years, really summer-wide. So what we'd suggest here is if we got kind of cooler, wetter trends, you're thinking more nitrogen for sure. May not have needed a lot of that since it was such a drought-type scenario for most of us last year. But under these kind of cooler, wetter conditions, you generally have more nitrogen need, more disease pressure, less weeds, less bugs. Bugs like it hot and dry. They like last year. The weeds like it hot and dry. So this would definitely be flipping the tables here on types of chemicals you might need here. So again, definitely seeing this in both our statistical and our climate cycle approach that there's definitely a shift in the weather pattern here. 2023 hurricane season, we're projecting again 13 to 15 named storms. That's normal is about 2 or 12 actually. So we're about 2 to 3 above average. Still very concerned. This pattern, this cycle still very much favors Florida, East Coast, just off the East Coast, Bermuda, maybe Bahamas. So it's more of an East Coast threat again, similar to this season here. Obviously Ian was epic in Florida. We ended up with about 14 named storms this year. So it was a doldrums of August, nothing in August for hurricanes, but So again, doesn't really have a lot of, we're not looking for any maybe major Texas, Louisiana type events that can get up into the Corn Belt this year. It'd be more toward the East Coast, and that really is good news because it doesn't impact the Corn Belt at all. So really no risk for you in terms of hurricanes. Tornadoes may be another story here. We started really fast. In fact, we were near record fast start in April this year. That black line was the 2022 tornadoes. We were up getting close to 500 by early to mid-April. So it was off to a torrid pace, way above average in April with the severe weather outbreaks. And then it started to tail off in May and June and then just cratered as we went through the summer, fall season due to the dry La Nina subsidence. You're just not going to get those thunderstorms. You're just not going to have as many tornadoes. We think that, again, with colder, wetter scenarios in summer, what creates colder weather in summer is cold fronts, right? And wetter, got a lot more moisture. That is perfect ingredients for more tornadoes. So we're going to lean above average here. Average would be close to 1,300 tornadoes for the U.S. for the season, for a year. We're going to lean about 1,350. So about 19% more than last year, most in 4 years. Again, so got to watch the whole season this year, April, May, June, late season, June, July, getting up into the northern part of the Corn Belt. So again, something to watch because we definitely think these will be much more active. All right, so let's get to some of the solutions we have for farmers here and explain some of these things. So FarmCast is just, we try to make it simple, right? It's a simple PDF email in your email every day, and it is a daily report. We'll walk through this. So the only thing you got to do when you get to FarmCast in the season is just plant your planting date. We're not ready for that yet because obviously we've only got January 4th as of right now. But as you get to April 15th, if you planted, you put your planting date on here. Are you going to do corn growing degree days or generic growing degree days? And then it'll just start tracking your data since you planted, since planting, what the weather did yesterday, today, hour by hour here for today. What's the general snapshot for today? Radar, winds, precip, temperatures. So you get a snapshot. And then next week, or this week rather, it's going to be hot. Well, this is week here in January, hot and wet, maybe where you live. So again, it gives you the trends of what's happening in your farm field. And then week 2, again, another map of more hot, more wet in the southeast. So again, it tracks all the data for your specific location. The one I like the best is on page 4, this growing degree day tracker. It actually, once you plant your planting date, it will tell you a year ahead when you're going to hit these 10 leaves, silking, tassel, pollen shed, blister denting, maturity. So it gives you the exact date that those conditions. This is one of our strengths. And then the year ahead forecast for your crop, temperature trends, rainfall trends, just to give you a sense of, hey, it's wet, 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 wet every month. You might want to think about what chemicals you need. Pam Chrissy put out some great products too on agricultural trends in Brazil. And this time of year, obviously, we're focusing heavily on South America and not much in the U.S. But as we get toward the March, April timeframe, you'll see the focus shifting to both countries, U.S. and Brazil, talking about what's happening weather-wise, the markets. So again, neat report that Pam puts out every Monday around lunchtime. And then again, you have access to the web portal. Web portal may be too technical for some and need to do all this, and you really don't need to because FarmCast tries to answer most of those questions, but it'll do your radar and your lightning and your trends, and you can see, okay, how dry is that period that I'm looking to, cut the hay or, cut a product or let something dry out. Hey, it's the driest in 10 years, so it's all future year ahead, a neat web tool. An underlies tool here, but again, I always mention it because I think it's valuable to farmers, is that kind of a custom alerting thing. This is not just severe weather alerts. We've got all that. You can set those up for text or email with this simple alert page. But this allows you to go and say, hey, Bill, I want to be alerted to 85 to 92, no rain, low winds, because I need to spray, right? I can't do that in real hot. I can't do it in real windy or humidity or whatever, right? Whatever conditions you want. Or you want to be alerted, Bill, alert me when there's 5 inches of rain, right? So this will do that too. So you can create thousands of these alerts if you want to, and it'll email them to you or text them to you when we see those conditions happening, both in the 14-day time frame and even the year ahead time frame. So it'll give you some planning opportunities. Hey, we see these hot, dry, windy days, or we see these hot or warm, not so windy days in the forecast. Chrissy Klinger, again, one other awesome meteorologist here, puts out an awesome product for Successful Farming magazine. I hope you've been tracking us over there. She puts out a report, a weekly little blog every week, and then in the magazine, I think that goes out to almost 500,000 farmers every month. So again, she writes some really fantastic stories about what we see in the year ahead. Don't always take our word for it. Again, reach out to Noah Freeman. He was with AgriLiant Genetics, a longtime farmer and genetics, knows all about us. He's used us for 7-8 years now. Now he's at Co-Alliance. So again, he's a contact if you want to talk to him about how he's used long-range weather for strategic planning. Make better decisions by being proactive, not reactive. So with that, folks, again, we'll end here, and hope you enjoyed the update here. Again, we are here to help, so don't hesitate to reach out to me or Pam or Chrissy or Rich. Happy to address any and all questions. So God bless you, folks. You're a favorite group of folks to work with over, say, Wall Street and big retail. Again, God bless you. Be safe. Have a great season. And again, we're here to help.